So for those that don't know me, I'm Danielle from Marigold PR. I'm our trade marketing and PR executive. I'm really excited to welcome everybody to Candora Connect Women in Psychedelics. We're very excited. We have two great panels lined up for today, followed by some networking. And I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement. As we gather in this virtual space, we acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples. Halton, where Marigold is located, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for being stewards of this traditional territory. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. So thank you very much for joining us and for being here today. And thank you so much to our media partner, Truffle Report, and our presenting partner, Marigold PR. Throughout the event, please join us in using the chat feature and keeping the conversation going on social with the Candora Connect hashtag. If you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. We'll be having a Q&A at the end of each panel. For those that are joining for your first Candora Connect, this is an event series that Marigold has been putting on for the past few years. Through our Women in Cannabis and Psychedelics events, we are pleased to have been able to promote over 250 women and providing them with a platform to share about their business. And we're so grateful for you all for joining us. I'd like to kick off today with a brief video from Wakeful Travel, and then we're going to be jumping into our first panel.
So check this out. This is a mindful travel journal. It's my first attempt at a startup of my own. You can manifest, plan, and document any adventure if it's close to home or in another country. While creating this, I worked a full-time job in content marketing for a retreat startup. Plus, I had several other side hustles to make extra cash to be able to fund the making of this journal. After hours and hours of work, the time came to finally launch. I was so proud of my product. I was stoked on myself for making it happen. I lined up the promotional video. Everything was going so well. And then...
The coronavirus.
The number of cases soaring just today.
This is truly an unprecedented situation.
Well, shit. What now? I was sitting on 1,000 travel journals and no one was traveling. And to add to the cherry on top of this shit Sunday, I lost my dream job. I'd like to say I shrugged it off, but that wouldn't be honest. I felt lost, totally discouraged, confused about what to do with my life. After a few months of soul searching and being a hermit, I started to think about creating another journal. A journal that I wished I had before I sat in several ayahuasca ceremonies a few years back. A journal I wished I had when I first worked with mushrooms in a ceremonial setting. A journal that I could have had when I first took LSD in the forest with my friends. So I reached out to some of the connections that I have in the psychedelic space to see if this was something that was needed. This is the response I got back.
My name is Paul Austin, I'm the founder and CEO of Third Wave, and what I love about the Wakeful Integration Journal is it helps to simplify what can often be a very overwhelming practice. How do we take the insights and awareness that comes from a high-dose psychedelic experience and weave that into our life? And the Wakeful Integration Journal does that tremendously well. So I can't wait to see how it benefits our audience at the Third Wave.
My name is Lana Perbick, and I am the founder of Modern Psychedelics, the podcast. I'm also training right now to become a certified professional coach. I'm so excited to get my hands on these journals and to use them in my client work because it's really the perfect tool along your integration process.
My name is Saad, and I am the founder of Silo Health. This workbook is a great way to tailor the integration process for yourself or for your community member, your peer, to help them make sense and make meaning out of their experience.
I'm Erin, co-founder of Guella Mushrooms. I believe that the Wakeful Integration Journals will be an integral part of support and integration work for psychedelic medicine moving forward. And the Guella team is really excited to co-create one with Jenny and the Wakeful Journals.
I think this could work. As you might know, psychedelic medicine is blowing up right now. Decriminalization movements are happening, and research is being conducted globally. The healing potential that psychedelics hold is infinite. It's relieving people of anxiety, depression, PTSD, eating disorders, insomnia, addictions, physical ailments, and even past trauma. But there's a catch. There's something that a lot of clinics, retreat centers, and guides are lacking in the space. It's how important the preparation and integration periods are. Wakeful Travel aims to support this integral part of your journey. I'm not saying that psychedelic medicine is for everyone. Plant medicines and travel are just two routes that I've taken to support my transformation. I want people to know that they have everything within them to heal themselves. The plants and psychedelics are tools that reflect our own innate wisdom, and the Wakeful Integration Journal is a tool that documents that wisdom and helps you apply it to your life. Let's show the world that a psychedelic renaissance is happening. Let's give people the tools they need to support their own healing journeys. Let's be wakeful travelers.
Awesome. Looking forward to hearing from Janelle later today on our careers panel. But right now we are going to be kicking off with our State of the Industry panel. So I would like to welcome up our panelists. Please come on up and turn your cameras on. Looking forward to this chat.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is Erica Dick. I'll be the moderator today for this first panel, and I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm a historian of health and social justice at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, and I've been studying the history of psychedelics in Canada and around the world for about the last 20 years. So it's really marvelous to see this incredible lineup of people. I've heard some of you speak before. I'm excited to hear new voices, and I'm so honored to be part of this women's space. I think it's such an incredible opportunity to build these networking opportunities, but also to really demonstrate what women have to offer in this space. And it's something that I'll say as a historian has been lacking in the past. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to open it up to some questions, and there'll be some time at the end for a Q&A with our audience members. So Sherry, can I go to you first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Sherry Boudram. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CanDelta, which is a regulatory and scientific cannabis and psychedelics consulting company. We operate our psychedelics consulting through PsyDelta, which is our company's dedicated psychedelic service. So we largely assist with licensing, also post-licensing operational support, inspections, due diligence audits. So we oftentimes work with big banks such as BMO and financial auditing companies like M&P. We also assist with preparing technical documents such as research protocols and standard operating procedures for companies. So it's just a subset of all the things we do. We often get thrown at us very unique, interesting, challenging regulatory questions that clients like to have help with. So we also assist with that as well. So prior to starting CanDelta, I actually worked at Health Canada in their medical cannabis program and also in their controlled substances program as well. So there I was a senior compliance and enforcement officer. I assisted with licensing and also on-site inspections of licensed producers and also companies that held dealers' licenses as well. I currently also serve as an independent board member for Next Leaf Solutions, which is a publicly traded Canadian cannabis extraction technology company. And I also serve as an elected board member of CAPRA, or the Canadian Association of Professionals in Regulatory Affairs. And my background is in chemistry. So I have a PhD in chemistry from York University. I also have an honors BSc in biological chemistry from the University of Toronto. A certificate in cannabis law and regulations from Osgoode Hall Law School, and a graduate certificate with honors in pharmaceutical regulatory affairs and quality operations from Seneca College as well.
So Sherry doesn't sleep, and
no, I also have a 16-month-old who is really into having temper tantrums these days. So yes, definitely no sleep.
All right, I'm gonna go next on my screen is Holly.
Hi, I'm so excited to be on this panel with everybody. My name is Holly Bennett. I am the communications director at Therasil. Therasil is a Canadian nonprofit patient advocacy group. We advocate for Canadians in medical need to have legal access to psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. To date, we've helped 47 patients gain access. And we have a big announcement coming out tomorrow, but I'm not allowed to disclose that yesterday, but or today rather. So I will keep that on the back burner. we have a 4-pillar mission, which is compassionate access, which we are hopefully doing a good job at, public education, which is why I love doing things like this, educating folks on, why we need access to psilocybin therapy in Canada, professional training, so training healthcare professionals in how to facilitate safe and effective psilocybin therapy for approved patients, as well as research, which we just started doing. We have a collaboration with researchers from McGill and Imperial College London. Prior to this, my entire career from the age of 19 up was in the cannabis industry, both medical and recreational. Definitely loved the medical side more because I really like helping patients. And yeah, I've done patient education, comms, marketing, PR, so a little bit of everything, worn many hats, mostly worked in startups, except for my last job, which was with Canopy Growth. And then I've been with TheraSil since May of last year. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. This is probably one of my first external speaking opportunities since being with TheraSil. So I appreciate the opportunity very much.
Well, welcome very much from us. And Olga, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Olga Chernolas. I'm a Chief Scientific Officer at Wake Network. At Wake, we are vertically integrated psychedelics company. We do everything from producing psilocybin containing mushrooms to taking those mushrooms and making drug form from them, to taking that drug form to our own clinical trials, to then taking patients' genomic, metabolomic data and trying to make sense of it in a precision medicine fashion. I'm a neuropsychopharmacologist by background. I'm also an assistant professor at University of Ottawa, where I'm teaching neuroscience of psychedelics. And I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
Excellent. This is such an amazing panel. I'm very excited to pick all of your brains with these questions now. So I wanted to start with an open question for all of you, and I can watch for hand signals or not if you want to jump in. But how have you seen the psychedelic industry change since you started working in this field? Holly.
I mean, I can start. I mean, the biggest change, I guess I'll start with two. The biggest changes I've seen are first, patients are now actually getting access. So when I first started in May of last year, nobody outside of patients in clinical trials, which I honestly don't know if any were going on at that time, nobody in Canada had legal access to psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. Tons of people were doing it underground. Tons of people are still doing it underground. But in terms of like government approved, above board psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with psilocybin mushrooms, it wasn't happening. That changed on August 4th, 2020. We helped 4 patients get special Section 56 exemptions from the Minister of Health. And then it's really kind of snowballed from there. So that's kind of point number one, is real people in Canada are using psilocybin mushrooms legally for their mental health, primarily end-of-life distress and depression and anxiety related to a terminal illness. But a few with depression have also received exemptions as well, which is incredibly exciting. Say the second thing is just the mainstream kind of coverage and conversation about psychedelics has exploded over the past year. Like, I remember when I first started, there was, whispers about psychedelics, but in kind of the mainstream media, it was very few and far between to find articles talking about this. And it was still very hesitant and very much like, what's the research? And research is important, don't get me wrong. But I think through hearing patient stories and understanding that people are using this medicine and the effect it has on folks, just the explosion of mainstream media has exploded, really. So it's really cool to see. This is really now like a dinner table conversation where I'm getting texts from aunts and messages from like long lost family friends saying like, oh, have you heard about psychedelics? And I'm like, yeah, I've heard. So yeah, it's really exciting to see just the momentum in the movement.
Thank you.
I like to add that from my perspective, I've really seen an evolution of the applicants that are looking to come into the industry and also who's holding these licenses. Previously, it was largely pharmaceutical companies or academic institutions that held Section 56 exemptions, for example, just so they could handle it for their own, very limited research. And now you're seeing, companies that are uniquely created to work in this space and only handle psychedelics, where pharmaceutical companies, they're doing their regular prescription drugs, and then they have their dealer's license so they can work with LSD or ketamine, or just have like a whole list of derivatives that they were looking to maybe potentially work on and synthesize, but didn't necessarily mean that they were going to do it, but they would get the dealer's license and have all the compounds listed on there. And Health Canada was very readily amenable to granting these licenses to them, because they're very well-known, established companies that are used to working in a regulated environment. So I think the trust where Health Canada is concerned was they were very strong in their trust in granting those licenses, and it was actually a very easy, fast process. Now a lot of companies that are coming in, again, as I was mentioning, are very dedicated companies. That's all they're doing, or they're even cannabis companies that are looking to diversify and carve out a part of their business where they're, or even their facility in some instances, where they're looking to also have psychedelics within their portfolio. So we're seeing a lot of diversity in the type of companies that are coming in. A lot more CROs are looking to be involved as well. I think that they're also opening their perspective on their interest in that as well. So Health Canada is becoming more in tuned with the fact that there is an industry that's becoming created and there's a lot of interest. So it's also causing them to ask more questions. There's delays in getting applications. So there is definitely a shift from, I would say, even last year compared to now.
And Health Canada aside, just looking at the industry side of things, there is actually now a psychedelic industry. There are 40 some companies listed on major exchanges that are specifically dedicated psychedelic companies. And I think few good things have came out of COVID, but enabling and expanding the talk around mental health and potential therapies that we haven't yet openly tapped into as an option has became more prominent talk. And now we are far more open discussing it. As Holly was saying, it's a dinner table discussion now, and it's a wonderful thing to see. I think that we have, in part, cannabis to be thankful for that. People just got on the open-mindedness rails, and it's easier now to see these taboo substances beyond the labels that we used to seeing them behind, but actually is something that carries a lot of therapeutic potential. So,
yeah, Holly, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that what Olga was saying. And I mean, I also think the pandemic, as so many horrible things have happened through that, if anything, it's really also brought to light our current mental health situation in Canada, and that it's not great, and we need other treatment options. And so people who may not have struggled with mental health prior to the pandemic now are, and they're saying, oh God, like the current system is not working and we need something else. So I think over the past year that has exacerbated mental health, which is obviously terrible, but it has brought kind of a catalyst for the need for change.
And it's definitely expanded the public acceptance because of that, even outside of our industry, where, again, as you were saying, that people are coming to you and saying, oh, have you heard about psychedelics? Like, it's something that they're recognizing as potentially a legitimate medicine.
Yeah, it's so hard to keep my historical tongue between my teeth here. The word psychedelic was coined in Canada in 1956, and this stuff was driven underground for a while. So I published my first book on this topic in 2008, and that conversation has just ratcheted up over the 21st century in really interesting ways. So it's very exciting to hear your perspectives on this. I'm going to go through some of the questions that some of which are sent to me to ask. So Sherry, the first question is for you, and I'll single you out now. But please, if you have, if anybody else has things they want to add, just please raise your hand or jump in with turn your mic off. So Sherry, how much do you see the psychedelic industry sort of building off of the momentum of the cannabis industry? And do you see that from your perspective in specific ways?
Yeah, I would say it's a very relevant topic and question, considering that so often the industry is being compared to cannabis, I think for some very obvious reasons. As Olga was saying, is that we're at a point where an industry in psychedelics is actually forming, despite the fact that there is regulations in place that the psychedelics industry is abiding by, but a true industry is actually starting to form, and there really aren't the appropriate regulations to really support long-term success of a psychedelics industry in a manner where you can obtain safe, consistent, equal access to compounds. And it's really difficult when we're sort of in an arbitrary system where, like for example, Section 56 is just being granted in very limited scenarios and not even consistently. So there could be a framework like cannabis that is in place for certain applications of psychedelics for sure. So what can we adopt? I would say our business from, what we do at Candelta has a big focus on regulatory compliance and licensing. So from a licensing perspective, we're seeing that Health Canada is becoming definitely more aware on things like the particular format and quality of information that goes into an application, which is directly translated from the cannabis, the expectations from the cannabis industry and the type of quality of information and extent of information that they're getting in those types of application. So this means that, it's important to prepare quality applications with a clear structure, with clearly highlighting the key points that Health Canada is anticipating, which is not always clear in the application that goes into the licensing. So we know that from cannabis that Health Canada is very concerned with the activities, where the starting material is coming from, for example, exactly what you're doing with the materials that you're handling, who you're looking to sell to. And previously Health Canada received way less applications, and the applications that they did receive were typically from academic institutions, from the pharma industry, and it was very straightforward. They really didn't ask many questions about what these companies were doing. And now they're definitely looking for a lot more details. So the quality of the application, more similar to what you would see in cannabis, and that extent of information is definitely, I think, something that can be translated over to the psychedelics industry. In addition to that, I would say the technical documents that go into running a facility, like standard operating procedures, is something more that we're seeing of as well. And outside of that, I think it's important to highlight maybe some of the issues that the cannabis industry has faced and is still facing, and that includes issues with insurance, the companies obtaining insurance, and also banking complications. I had a call actually today with the manager of the Bank of Montreal who handles the cannabis division, and he was mentioning that they still have a very low risk tolerance for cannabis companies. And we're talking about how that kind of feeds into the psychedelics industry, and they also have concerns particularly around companies where their core service offering and their core portfolio is around either cannabis or psychedelics. And they're not companies that are largely diversified like pharmaceutical companies, where their business also includes largely prescription drugs, and then a small subset of that is in the psychedelic space or cannabis space. So I think those are just some things to be aware of. So, in addition to the good lessons that we learned from cannabis, there's also maybe some not so good ones.
Great. The next question is for Holly, but I'm just going to remind people to please put your questions in the chat. And I see there's some forming there already. Hopefully we'll have a transcript of this in case you run out of time and can get answers out to people as well. So the next question for Holly is around, can you tell us a little bit more about patient advocacy? What is involved, and how can clinicians best create access to psychedelic medicines for their patients?
Yeah, for sure. So my job, the nucleus of my job is, public facing advocacy, and it's really amplifying the voices of patients who are either seeking access to psychedelic medicine or have already received psychedelic medicine and want to share the benefits, with others, and amplifying the voices of healthcare practitioners, researchers, and other advocates in the space who want people to know that, this is a treatment option happening now, and it needs to be a greater treatment option in the future. So whenever I'm talking about advocacy, that has to go hand in hand with education. So for example, if I just start advocating for access to psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, I'm going to guess that most people, in the, I'm going to say the regular world, without this kind of like ecosystem of people who know these terms, go, what the hell is that? What was psilocybin assisted psychotherapy? So everything we do, we have to start with the building blocks of educating people on the terms that we're using, what this really means, why it's needed, and then you can advocate for it. So it's everything we do is educating, then advocating, and they really just mesh so well together. So I mean, and I know there's another question coming up about the challenges that we face, and that's part of the challenge, is the fact that you never know what stakeholder you're necessarily talking to and their level of education on these topics. So how can you advocate when you don't know where you're meeting them at? But so in terms of patient advocacy, it's amplifying the voices of patients when their voices want to be amplified. And in terms of healthcare professionals, what we've seen is, so every Section 56 exemption is paired with a letter of recommendation from a physician. So that letter of recommendation is from usually their primary care doctor for the patient. And what we've seen is when those primary care doctors or psychiatrists are willing to get scrappy with Health Canada, for lack of a better word, those patient exemptions get approved. Whereas if a patient or if a doctor just writes that letter and then says, okay, my job is done here, that patient application may sit for way longer than it needs to. But when you have a doctor who's really, really willing to go to bat for their patient and say, listen, I'm a healthcare professional. It is my job to determine the treatment options that are best for my patient. And I'm telling you, a bureaucrat at Health Canada, that this is my recommendation for the patient. Why are you questioning my professional decision? That moves some needles. And, we've had patients who their applications have been approved in less than 24 hours because their MPs have gotten involved, their primary care physicians, external supports have gotten involved. And so patient advocacy is advocating for that patient. And so the more voices that are available to advocate for that individual and the broader cohort of individuals that need access to this but aren't willing to necessarily get on a pedestal and say, it's me, I need access, that's how we move the needle. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And I think there's some other stuff that's going to circle back around to this. So Olga, can you tell us a little bit about the state of clinical research today and where it's starting to intersect with industry in this space as well?
Absolutely. So if we looked at how the research scene looked 3 years ago, you would see few major companies doing the research in this area and few major academic institutions who were, brave and persistent enough to be fighting to get their hands on these controlled substances to do the research that actually drives all this resurgence of interest in psychedelics today. Today, because of the growing acceptance and recognition of the tremendous need for new mental health treatments, we see that there are probably several dozen of research centers around the world, primarily supported through philanthropic initiatives. And we just saw, I think in October, for University Health Network, there was a major donation, and now there is a similar initiative right here in Toronto. And aside from academic and near academic research, now research initiatives in psychedelics became a reality for private companies because they see that there is definitely an interest and need, and now a reality in doing this work. So it opened up the research space so much more. So if before it was, basic major substances like psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, now through involvement of industry groups, we are expanding to full pharma approach, and there are companies, trying to come up with better molecules that would have more optimal profiles, and there is more research into different therapeutic indications. So all in all, it's definitely gonna drive the industry and the scientific knowledge, and the reason for all this is improvement of well-being of us all, and especially patients who need it the most.
I just want to ask one follow up to that is, do you see this relationship, do you see the clinical research with psychedelics as different from what else is going on in neuropsychopharmacological research right now?
Not really, and that's a big differentiator of psychedelic space from cannabinoids. With cannabis, the change in regulations was brought by grassroots, by patient advocacy. And in psychedelics, now the resurgence of interest and the psychedelic renaissance, as it's being called now, is actually science-driven, and it rides on the clinical research from primarily these major academic institutions like Johns Hopkins and Imperial College of London, but also some non-for-profit groups like MAPS and USONA, where they went by the book and they applied all the same principles that you would for any other type of substance. And by doing that work, they were able to, first and foremost, get to doing this research. Because if you were just now, today, it's possible to be a psychedelic researcher. 10 years ago, it wasn't a thing. You were neuro something or psycho something researcher, and among other things, you get to work with psychedelics. So in psychedelics, I think this is science-driven, and I think it helps in the recognition of the therapeutic potential by the regulatory bodies and by the healthcare professionals.
Cool, thank you. Holly, back to you. Is there an area in this industry that you think deserves more attention? And if so, what is that? And how can we begin exploring things on a wider scale, moving from perhaps those individual patient advocacy stories to thinking about scaling this up to broader advocacy?
For sure. When I was thinking about this question, I mean, a lot of things were going through my head. I think there's, first and foremost, I think ensuring that the industry, as we grow, make sure that patients are always at the center of whatever you're doing. So thinking back to how does this benefit the patient, not how does this benefit the bottom line of our company? How does this benefit my pocketbooks? How does this benefit my career? It always needs to come back to how are we helping this individual? And so keeping that in mind, I mean, you'll hear us talk a lot about this at Therisol. We need regulatory change. So Section 56 exemptions, they've been great to open the door, but they're not sustainable. They are ad hoc, they're arbitrary. You can have two patients apply on the same day, basically give almost identical information to Health Canada and the Minister of Health. One patient's exemption can get approved, the other patient can wait for 250 days. And so there's no rhyme or reason for which exemptions are getting approved, why they're getting approved, except for when you get, physician advocates involved, MPs involved. So the need for regulatory change is urgent because patients need access now. And we've had several patients, unfortunately, pass away while they've been waiting for their exemptions. And that's quite frankly unacceptable. So if we had regulatory change, and what I mean by regulatory change is a system where I, as a patient, could go to a doctor, say, I would like to explore this treatment option. If that physician or nurse practitioner thinks this is a good treatment option for me, they can prescribe or write a medical document for this. Similar to cannabis, I would be able to get, a regulated product from a licensed producer, a licensed dealer, and then if I need psychotherapy with that, which I'm going to guess for most patients, that is the right treatment option, depending on their health condition, then they would be able to be, connected with trained healthcare professionals who can facilitate that treatment option for them. So we need a system like that. I'm not saying that is like the perfect, the be all end all, but it's at least a start. And unless we have regulatory regulations that come about like that, patients are going to continue to die while they're waiting for their exemptions. Patients are going to continue to wait for months on end, suffering while they watch their peers get access and they don't. And they're going to continue to, quite frankly, lose faith in our government for, why are you not exploring this further? Why are you not being compassionate towards my needs? And why is a politician, the federal minister of health, granting individual healthcare decisions when really it should be in the hands of doctors and patients, like literally every other healthcare decision. I like to make the analogy that, you know, if I was a cancer patient, would I have to write a letter to the Minister of Health and say, please give me access to chemotherapy, and then wait months to access that chemotherapy? No, people would be outraged. That's absolutely ridiculous. But that's literally what's happening with psilocybin assisted psychotherapy right now. So we need a regulatory change. And in terms of how do we move that forward, every single person who believes that this needs to be a treatment option needs to write to their MP. They need to talk to their friends, their family, and their doctor. They need to spread the word about why this, you know, why regulations need to happen. And we have seen a lot of success by engaging MPs because they can carry your voice forward to the House of Commons, to the parliaments, to the health ministers. So that's my recommendation. If you believe in this, write your MP today. Don't delay, and write them every single day until they respond to you. They work for you.
Thank you. I'm curious now to go back to Olga, because there seems to be, you know, some research momentum as well that is also perhaps moving into this space that may influence regulatory changes, but also this kind of personal story. There's some interesting tension, but also some synergies there. So how do we bridge the gap between real life data, or maybe patient data, with rigorous research that Olga has described, to give the healthcare community the kind of clarity and conclusions that they need to drive this agenda forward? How can we kind of marry these objectives, or can we?
I think the simplest way to go about that is to take the practices from the real life scenarios and take them through the rigor of clinical trials. That way, I think what people are doing on their own gets validated and recognized by healthcare professionals. So to move in that direction, at Wake, we are now rolling out world's first controlled clinical trial of microdose psilocybin. Aside from all the hype that the practice has had, there are 0 controlled trials researching the practice with microdosing psilocybin. And not only that is happening, but when people use psychedelics, and specifically psilocybin, because it can be naturally derived, when people use psilocybin, 99, probably 0.9%, they would use naturally derived substance. Whereas all the research that's been done to date, and all that research has been done for a full dose application, has been done with the synthetic substance. So we are doing exactly what I've been telling you about. We are taking the practice of microdosing. We are taking the naturally derived psilocybin that people use when they microdose in their day-to-day lives, produce it to the regulatory requirements that regulators are seeking to be met, and putting this practice through regulated clinical trial. I guess that's the way to go to confirm or refute this data, and to make the healthcare community more comfortable with accepting psychedelics as a treatment option.
I have so many questions. I'm going to try to stick to the script, but Sherry, I want to come back to you. As regulatory experts, what are most of your psychedelic clients looking for in this moment?
Mm-hmm. So being a relatively nascent industry, our clients are looking really for a unique position in the space. So that could be, you know, what compounds they're looking to work with, unique formulations or extraction techniques that could potentially lead to opportunities for IP or patents that could really leverage them, or who they're looking to sell to. So this could translate into largely manufacturers, researchers, even researchers in the form of, you know, manufacturers who have a research component to their business, or academic institutions or CROs for clinical trials. And I would also say that for those who are there are also those who are focused largely on patients. So they'll work closely with patient advocacy elements, the patient experience, assisting with administration, and also an integration portion as well. And we do have some clients who are also hoping to even extend that further, eventually when the regulations would permit something like that, where there's a tourism aspect to it, where they have potentially patients that could come outside of, from outside of Canada and experience a very curated, guided workshop. And still focusing on the medical aspect. Of course, the regulations are not really there yet, which can hopefully evolve to something that's more accessible and safe and consistent and equal for everyone. So that's sort of, I guess, the buckets of clients that we have. But I would say largely companies are, I would say, manufacturers or research and leading into clinical trials.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to come back to Holly and ask a slightly, you've already answered some of the question that we have, so I'm going to change it up a little bit. What do you see as one of the challenges facing the kind of PR and the education piece to this? And I'm going to twist this with my historical brain and say that there was a past time when psychedelics were legal, and there's some claims that things went off the rails and that people started using them badly. So how do we sort of temper that education and the public facing piece of this to make sure that we're also managing potential risks or even the potential stigma that still persists outside of obviously this enlightened Zoom room?
That's a great question, Erica. And it reminds me that I need to touch base with you to pick your brain so that I can bring in some of that historical context into our comms, because I don't think a lot of people understand. If you've had the pleasure to ever hear from Erica, I mean, psychedelics have a deep history in Canada, and I don't think I and Therasil has done a good enough job at really saying yeah, this didn't just happen a year ago or 2 years ago. Actually, this goes back tens of thousands of years. But in Canada, research, we're talking about the 1950s. I'm not going to do your spiel because I don't know as well as you do. But there's definitely, I'm a very cautious person by nature. I'm not a risk taker, which may be surprising given that I'm in this space and have kind of pushed the boundaries with my career a little bit. But my brain always goes to crisis comms, and there is always a risk that a patient is going to have either underground or above ground therapy, that a patient is going to have a bad experience, that they may have a bad experience with their therapist. There's a lot of different risks involved in psychedelic psychotherapy. So that's part of the reason that we at Therasil are quite conservative in our recommendation of the regulations. Is we want to make sure that safety is paramount, that patients feel safe, they're held, not just that they feel safe, they are safe, that they're accessing medicine that is regulated, they know what they're taking, they know everything that they need to know before entering this altered state of consciousness, that they're doing all of the preparatory work with therapists, they're doing all of the integration work with therapists, and not just therapists, but therapists who are deeply trained in this unique modality. Doing talk therapy with somebody or CBT or DBT is very different from guiding somebody through an altered state of consciousness on 5 grams of mushrooms, which is what most of the patients that we work with are taking, this hero dose or this really big dose. So safety is paramount to ensure that things don't go off the rails. And I'm sure things, not knocking on wood, I don't want to manifest this, but there will be issues and there will be hurdles that we need to get over. But I think as long as we keep patient safety and treatment efficacy at the forefront of everything that we're doing, no matter what piece of the industry that you're in, you just have to keep going. Is this the best decision for this patient? And so, for example, a patient may go through the entire exemption process. They may wait 3 months for their exemption. They may get their exemption, and then them or their therapist or their doctor may go, you know what? This actually isn't the best option for you anymore, because either your diagnosis has changed, your mindset has changed, there's external factors that have changed, and that's okay. So I think that's, patient safety is paramount, and I will scream that from the rooftops until it doesn't need to be screamed anymore, but it will always need to be kept there. Yeah.
Wonderful. I want to open this question up to Sherry and Olga as well, and then transition into a Q&A period. So I encourage people to put their questions in there. I'm keeping track of them to the best of my ability. But are there specific challenges or pitfalls that you see on the horizon from the perspective of kind of regulation and industry directives, and also from the clinical and academic research side? And if you want to maybe briefly comment on those things, and then I will pitch out some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I guess I could jump in first. Well, I just want to say I'm really looking forward to getting an update from government on the special access program and what it's going to look like with the proposed amendment to Part C of the Food and Drug Regulations that would essentially reverse the 2013 decision to prohibit restricted drugs from the special access program. So we're supposed to hear something early this year, so around January, February. So hopefully it's in favor of the change, and I think that's really going to open up opportunities, for access to medicine. Where there could be potential challenges, if the government is not open or shows resistance to moving forward on a potential pathway for regulations that's more amenable to this industry, that's just definitely going to be a challenge. There's been so much good, I think, headway so far that's happened in 2001 with a lot of advocacy work, a lot of pressure on MPs, and Health Canada themselves have also formed advisory groups, for example, to help to really find out what sort of information they need in order to develop a framework. And I know TheraCell has been doing a lot of great work too, and has actually proposed some regulations to Health Canada, which I've read, and it very closely does match with, I think, the medical cannabis framework. And so, I mean, that definitely makes it easier for government to envision what potential set of regulations could look like. So I'm hoping that that pathway is that, we continue to make more headway where that's concerned.
On my end, this is something that I was always turned off by in cannabis industry, and I'm very wary of it in psychedelics now when I hear that certain substance is a cure-all and will help everybody and anybody with any condition, whatever it might be. I just tune out and not just lose interest, but lose faith in whatever is being said and whatever is behind that substance. And my worry is not just the substance, but industry in general. So I want there to be more responsibility and scrutiny from us, probably people in the industry, in disseminating the type of information that we put out into the world, and putting the quality level and certain type of, self barriers for information that we decide to let out, so that we won't hurt ourselves that way. And my other worry is now the psychedelic space is somewhat being held by ketamine, which is, you could argue, is it a psychedelic or not? So there are companies opening up ketamine clinics in hope that one day they will turn them in psychedelics in general clinics. And as happy as I am to have ketamine as an option that in many cases helps lift people out of dark places very fast and fairly reliably, it's an addictive drug. And I hope that it doesn't hold the space for too long and doesn't create bad press for psychedelics in general.
Thank you. There's so many amazing questions and leads here. I'm going to go to the chat though and ask a few questions. I'm going to combine one here from Paulina, who asks whether the government is giving Section 56 exemptions for product testing, and whether it's possible to partner with Health Canada for approval to test potential products. I'm guessing that's for you, Sherry, but I don't. That puts you on the spot.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, is the government giving Section 56 exemptions for product testing, and is it possible to partner with Health Canada to basically to achieve that?
Well, it depends on what the scope of the testing is. So they'll give a Section 56 exemption if the scope of the testing is fairly limited, where the compound isn't modified too much. Like they're pretty agreeable to granting Section 56 exemptions for things like stability testing. If there's more involved testing that's involved for that particular study, then they would ask you to have a dealer's license for that. So it really depends on the research protocol and what you're looking to do for that testing.
Thank you. There are a couple of long questions from Annalise. I will do my best to get them out, Annalise. So again, on regulations, there may be a benefit now that psychedelics are operating under a different section of Health Canada versus having a separate directorate like we have with cannabis or with service standards experience treating the product similar to other medical products. Do you see psychedelics continuing to be in a generic section of Health Canada like cannabis, where we had to get a Section 56? And there's a bunch of acronyms here that I'm not sure I even understand, under the ACMPR/MMPR, which is significantly quicker than the cannabis specialized licensing unit, as well as having an experienced economic and business development unit versus cannabis. So I teasing apart the psychedelics versus cannabis element here, I guess the question, there's a follow-up, is that since psychedelics are not Supreme Court driven like medical cannabis was for right to access, since this is a scientific medical process similar to other medications, do you, all of you, hypothesize the process to widespread legal medical access as being significantly different than the cannabis model? I think, if I'm paraphrasing.
Okay, there's a lot there. I'll try to say my opinion, I guess, based on what I think I understood. So I guess the first question was, is there like a separate, I guess like how Health Canada has traditionally thought of it? Yeah. So with cannabis, originally it was, you grant access through the Section 56 model, and then eventually Health Canada allowed for a commercial market where you could get a medical document, through your healthcare practitioner, register with a licensed producer and obtain your cannabis that way. And the medical document was created by Health Canada because they recognized that they didn't really have a traditional drug approval process for cannabis products. There is no therapeutic linkage to any of the products that are made. So it can't really be a prescription that the physicians are writing. So Health Canada created the framework of having a medical document that outlines a lot of the same type of information that's captured, but it's framed a little bit differently, so it's not really a prescription. And that's why some physicians actually have an issue with prescribing cannabis as well to patients. So I think that if Health Canada was to take a model like that and translate that into Health Canada or to the psychedelics industry to allow for more access, I think that would obviously be a very easy, fast, cost-effective way to reduce the access barrier, very quickly, so that people can have access to psychedelics as a medicine. But I do think that there could be a framework that's like that, that's very similar to medical cannabis in instances where where having a therapeutic linkage to a product is maybe less crucial, where the clinical trial data is maybe less crucial, so they feel comfortable with having a model where you only need a medical document. Whereas in other instances, the application needs to be very, stringent on having, okay, we're linking this product with a very clear therapeutic use, and that's, even translated into the label claim, prescription is needed, and that's going to look more like a model where it's going through the typical drug approval process, and it looks more like a pharmaceutical, has a drug identification number. So maybe there's room in the industry, in Health Canada's mind, for two types of frameworks depending on the application, and really where they could feel comfortable making that distinction, like where that line is drawn. And maybe that kind of comes down to where the research comes in and where the data lies and how that's presented to Health Canada. And maybe they feel comfortable creating those two frameworks. But I think that, I think having a model like medical cannabis with medical document is a good start. Would Health Canada feel comfortable with that completely? I'm not entirely sure.
So in my view, I'm seeing the perhaps two-tiered process. I don't know how similar to what Sherry has described, but I think that there will be medical access because from the research that's out there, from breakthrough designations by FDA, it seems like MDMA and psilocybin will become recognized medical options in the nearest future. But I think that through pretty strong voices in decriminalized nature and people advocating for access to natural substances, I don't think that it's a genie that Health Canada or any other regulatory body will be able to put back in the bottle. So I think there will be probably separate process for recognizing these two streams of types of substances and source of material for the treatment.
We are getting close to the end of our time, but I want to squeeze out every last question that I can here. So I'm trying to combine a couple. So one was a question about the timing of this process, and another is a question about Canada's relationship with the United States. Both I'm inferring here in terms of that clinical research, but in terms of also perhaps watching each other and following each other sometimes when it comes to these regulatory changes. So maybe in your last 45-second answer from each of you, do you have any predictions about the timing of access and Canada's relationship with the US in terms of the psychedelic renaissance? In 45 seconds.
I'm going to be optimistic and say access within the next year, potentially very cautious framework for access, but above and beyond Section 56s, that's not based on any fact, that's just my gut. And in terms of relationship with the US, I mean, when we started our work, we did a webinar with the Yes on 109 people, which is like the Oregon initiative to legalize psilocybin therapy in Oregon. And it seems like we're kind of doing this with Oregon, which is great to see. It's great to see, I mean, especially when other countries as well, then that kind of puts pressure on our government to say, oh, they're doing that, maybe we should do that, or what are the pros and cons of following in somebody else's footsteps. So, and you know, we have talks with people in the UK and Australia and other countries as well. So it's really great to see this kind of like global movement happening. And that's, you know, beyond the US.
Thank you. All right, 20 seconds each. Any last words?
Yeah, I think that access is going to increase in the next year. What that's going to look like, I think that's, you know, TBD. I think first it's probably more likely to look like Health Canada probably just being better at approving Section 56 exemptions as a first step, doing that faster and maybe more consistently. And then, yeah, I would probably say changes, larger scale changes would probably be, I don't know, 3 years out, maybe. Yeah, I think that's maybe a prediction. But yeah, first increase access with Section 56. And I think with relations to the US, I mean, where research is concerned, I think the government is very aware of what's going on in the US and who those players are. They are in a lot of the conversations. Health Canada actually, they do attend a lot of the conferences, a little bit incognito, but they do have reps there. And if you know who they are, like you might bump into them. But they are pretty aware. They're keeping tabs on that. I think that where research is concerned, again, they are definitely more agreeable to that, you know, collecting data. And I think that's where they feel comfortable right now in terms of developing a regulatory framework. I think we're a little bit away from that.
Well, Olga, last words.
Amen. And I think that the special access program will bring the substances back. Another question is how comfortable the doctors would be with tapping into special access program. And in terms of cross-border things, on all things research, science doesn't know borders. So regardless of where it's done, it's generally recognized. If it's done to the quality level, it's recognized by the regulatory bodies, regardless of where it's done.
Thank you so much for this incredibly stimulating conversation. It was a thrill to be part of this. I want to thank all our panelists, and we can all emoji clap you. And I also want to let our listeners know that starting in a few moments will be the next panel on career opportunities in the psychedelic industry panel, featuring Janelle Dion, Kelsey Ramson, Christina Casson, and there will also be a networking session. So over to Danielle. Sorry for taking an extra minute.
No, and I actually want to throw it back to you because Erica, you have a book out. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that super quick before we switch to the next panel?
Sure. I've got a book out called Wonder Drug, which is a graphic novel of the history of psychedelic research in Canada. It is meant to help with Holly's mission to bring a different level of education to new readers and in a very accessible format. And in a couple of weeks, we have another new book out on the treatments in Hollywood Hospital, which was a research clinic in New Westminster that treated patients for a price for psychedelics. It was a private hospital. So watch for that. Thanks.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. And thank you so much to our whole panel. You guys were wonderful. It was great hearing from you. And just bringing up Katie Pringle right now, our Marigold's PR co-founder, who is going to be moderating our Careers in Psychedelics panel. And if the rest of our panelists want to turn their cameras on, we'll get you up here.
Wow, that panel was fantastic. I always learn so much, and I keep the chat going. I love the questions, and it was so helpful to kind of see the back and forth there and get some answers. And yeah, thank you so much. And Erica, your book looks amazing, and the fact you have another one coming out already is also pretty incredible. So I hope your launch last week went really well. My name's Katie Pringle. I'm the co-founder of Marigold PR. We have been in the cannabis space for 5 years and the psychedelic space for about 1.5 years. And I can't tell you the amount that I've learned. My joke is often that you don't go into PR because you're great at science, but yet I happen to have found a role where I've learned more about science than I really ever had the opportunity to do through schooling and based on where my strengths were. So thank you so much, ladies, for sharing today. We may have one more panelist joining us. We'll see. I think there's some technical difficulties. But what I wanted to do was throw over to our panelists today to get them to introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Christina. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Katie. I am so excited by the lineup of this event because we're partnered with actually all of the organizations that are being represented today. My name is Christina Casson. I am Chief of Staff with Microdose Psychedelic Insights, and we're your guide to the business of the psychedelics industry. We are a media and events company really focused on bringing psychedelic medicine to the forefront of modern medicine. So in my role, I wear many hats working on many projects, but a particular focus for me is growing the organization. And so I'm really excited to discuss career opportunities in this space today. Thank you.
Awesome. And actually, while you're introducing yourself, did you want to talk just a little bit quickly about Miami? It was such a monumental, amazing event for your whole team and for kind of the world that came together.
Yes, it was so exciting. We hosted Wonderland, the largest in-person psychedelics conference in Miami last month. And it was just so exciting to finally be together in person. I think we've all been waiting a long time for that. So that was lovely. And we really hosted a fabulous, impressive lineup of speakers and thought leaders in the space. People like Rick Doblin from MAPS and Dr. Matthew Johnson at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, you name it. We also had sports athletes and those celebrities who are outspoken about psychedelic medicines and what they can offer. So that was really exciting to host our first event. We have more coming up. We'll be in Malta in Europe in April. So please come join us in Europe. And then we'll also be we'll be announcing a new program called Microdose X, and I'll look forward to sharing a little bit about that today.
Fabulous, fabulous. Janelle, I'm so happy to have you on this panel. We saw your video earlier, but for anyone who missed it and any other details, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, thanks so much. I just learned a ridiculous amount on that last panel. Yeah, so my name's Janelle. I I recently started Wakeful Travel. It's been quite a long journey, as you could see in the video. It moved from being a mindful travel journal to now psychedelic integration journals. And there will be a new kind of community I'm building from all of the Kickstarter backers, and really like providing a community where they can have peer support and connect weekly. As well, I have another branch of the business where I'm working with retreat centers, clinics, conferences, supplement brands to create co-branded or white label journals specific to their audience's needs. So that means that we can use the journals that I have as a template. There's a macrodosing journal for journeys in there, and then a microdosing journal. So use that as a template, and then we can adjust the pages catered towards that their audience's voice and content, really. So I look forward to working with different organizations in the space and having these tools of transformation be available to more people. And then as well, I'm head of content at Third Wave right now. So we're one of the largest psychedelic organizations or psychedelic education platforms, sorry. And we also have a coaching certification program. So we are training the trainers. So it's one of there's not that many non-clinical trainings. So we are teaching coaches who already have an established coaching practice or they aspire to be a coach, and helping them incorporate psychedelics into their practice. So that's exciting.
Janelle, thank you for all the good work you do at the Third Wave, and really congratulations on the Mindful Travel book. I need to get my hands on one.
Thanks so much.
And so you wonderful people are perfect to kind of talk about careers in psychedelics, given your own personal careers, and then also how you're both supporting the careers of others through coaching and training and kind of building out microdose. So let's start from a bit of a personal note. So Janelle, let's throw back to you. How did you get started in this industry?
It was kind of by accident, actually. So I was living in Nelson in British Columbia, and I just needed a change, and I wanted to be more aligned and doing something that I loved, and I had no idea what that would look like. I was a holistic nutritionist at the time, and so I went online and I found this retreat startup, and I saw their marketplace, and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like the beginning of like an Airbnb for retreats. And I applied. I had no idea that they were primarily a software company. And so Retreat Guru actually sells software to retreat centers all around the world. I'm sure they have like 1,000 centers or facilitators now on their software. And that's where I started. I started in social media and affiliate marketing, content partnerships, and really like just being an absorbent sponge, doing any job. It was a small startup. So I was just doing anything I could, ended up onboarding clients, ended up going on a trip to Costa Rica and visiting 20 different retreat centers, ended up going down, doing my own work in Costa Rica, sitting with ayahuasca, and then sitting with the co-founders of the company, drinking ayahuasca. And then all of us were all just like learning and growing together on like a personal level and in our work. And so that's kind of where I got started. It combined like travel with plant medicine. So yeah, it just ended up working really well for me.
Wow, that's amazing. I think it is so interesting how so many people in this industry do have a pretty deep personal connection to why they've decided to explore this as a career, because it's not exactly a straight line. And, cannabis has come a long way in terms of stigma, in terms of career choices, but psychedelics is still at very nascent. And so Christina, what's your story? How did you end up at microdose?
Definitely through that personal connection, the personal, reasons, but it took me a while to get there. So I started my career in banking, and I was working in that industry for 8 years. I was climbing the corporate ladder and doing well in that world. And then I decided I just wasn't being fulfilled. I wasn't finding my joy. It wasn't my passion. So I left banking. I traveled for a year on my own around the world. And then during that time, California had voted to legalize cannabis. And so when I was coming home to California, I decided to dive into that space, really fueled by my passion for alternative medicines. And I worked from the ground up. I started in the cannabis industry as a brand ambassador, where I was representing the brand and teaching consumers about the products in the retail spaces. So it was very much a ground floor entry. And then I worked my way up to become a brand manager. At the very start of the pandemic, I was laid off from that cannabis job. Actually, it was the second time I was part of a company-wide layoff in cannabis, a very volatile industry. So I took some time to process that and to think about what I really wanted. And I pivoted into the psychedelic space when I saw the momentum that was really happening, all of the online conferences, all of the educational content. I just dove into it and learned as much as I could. So that led me to Microdose. I joined our very first conference, which was online last year in April of 2020. I just sat in and learned, and then I got to know the team, and I'm here today, about a little over a year, with the company. So I personally first knew that I wanted to be supporting and participating and working in psychedelics when I was in an ayahuasca ceremony during that year of travel. In ceremony, the medicine spoke to me and told me that someday I should really pursue this, and that I have a future in it. And I'm so glad that today I am now, fulfilling that.
Wow. I mean, it just, like, the opportunities feel so endless. Like, if a ceremony can inspire your career decisions, inspire better mental health, like, it just really is sort of overwhelming to think about the transformational change that people can make by becoming closer to this industry. But it is an industry and it is a business, and so there's sometimes some conflicting thoughts on that. I'm already going off script, but I was thinking actually maybe we could touch on that a little bit, based on your personal experiences that you've had, and also based on the work you're doing. How do you feel they complement, or are there any challenges with any kind of confliction at any point? Christina, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for asking the tough questions, Katie. This is such a good one. It's something that I struggled with as I navigated what was happening in the space. Even calling the space an industry can be alarming to some. So I needed to decide, how am I going to participate and what's going to feel right for me? And it might not be right for everyone. So even though I am with a company that is focused on the B2B aspect of psychedelics and very much in the business industry side of things, I am able, in my role, I'm able to bring up the other such important facets of what psychedelic medicine means and what kind of an opportunity we have with it. So, for example, I'm always trying to include something that is really valuable, that's part of our business focused event, but something that addresses Indigenous reciprocity or addresses diversity in the space. These things are really important to me personally. It's what has driven me to be part of this space. First sitting in a ceremony with an Indigenous shaman. If I didn't come from, because I came from that route and from that space, I want to always remember it. So I'll always insist that we have a panel, or that we are just listening to Indigenous people and learning from them and hearing what's important to them, and how can we, what can we be doing for them and with them.
Awesome. Thank you. And Janelle, what are your thoughts?
I love that, Christina. I come from the similar experiences as well, and so with that company being my very first one in the space, like I didn't come from a corporate background, right? And so it's really like all I know, and so I think I try to bring that into Third Wave and into Wakeful Travel, where it's like, yeah, how can we create a culture that is always, bringing forth that Indigenous wisdom and respecting and also acknowledging where we learned what we're teaching other people, right? So like, yes, that this is new to so many people right now, but there's been tons and tons of people researching this for a really long time, and that should be made known. And same with those who have been working with these medicines for so long. Like, it's nothing new. These medicines, the teachings have been here for a really long time, and it's so worth respecting that acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you both for bringing that up. Erica did an amazing presentation last week at Grow Up, where she talked about the history of medicine. So she's kind of an expert in that arena. And it's been fascinating to learn how it sort of evolved through our time, also stopped for generations in terms of research and development. And we really are part of a very special time where the future looks very bright. And so sort of on that note, women in stigmatized industries often represent quite a small number of constituents. So, we saw that in cannabis, and I think we're also seeing it in psychedelics in a real way. And so I would love your thoughts on, Christina, we'll start with you. Like, would love your thoughts on, what women can really bring to the table. And sort of how you've been feeling. I would also like to just acknowledge that, Microdose has done a really great job with diversity and gender diversity in their team. So you're coming from a great place. But what do you personally feel about the opportunities that women can bring to this space?
Well, thank you for recognizing that, Katie. We had our own growth to do as far as the diversity of our team and as far as gender balance. Our team is a male founding team who chose to really be intentional about how we were growing, who we were bringing on board. And so today we are more than 50% female staff, and we are a multinational group that brings in diversity in the form of ethnicity and gender and different perspectives, which is so important. It's what makes us stronger. So I think what women bring to this space, first what comes to mind is the ability to multitask. Women, we know that women are really stellar at that. And although it's been shown to not be as effective at getting things done, I think it allows women a really unique place to bring nuanced perspective, because we're thinking about so many things at once. And I think that's a real strength that women have. I would say that the psychedelics industry offers a new playground in opportunity for women. I think that the status quo of former industries, possibly even of cannabis, doesn't really hold up as much in psychedelics, or at least I believe, and what I try to do every day is to give women opportunities that there may not have been in these other industries, because we're not really agreeing to the status quo in this space.
Mm-hmm. I love that perspective. That was something that was really felt in cannabis as well, that it, for creating a new industry, we have lots of opportunities to create the kind of industry we'd all want to be a part of. And in some ways that didn't exactly pan out. And so, this is really another chance, I think. And in the same way you bring up, Indigenous focus, it's our chance to create the right kind of industry. So I find that really inspiring. Janelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I agree with the multitasking for sure. I would say empathy and communication and awareness. is something that women do really well. I feel though that there are tons of men in the space really encompassing that, because I'm seeing it around me and the male leaders where they're working with these plant medicines. And then, as some of you know, you often feel that divine feminine energy. And then when you really feel that, like, it's super hard to explain to someone who has never worked with medicine before. But when you feel that, then they can go out, and they do want to go out and support women and hire more women and really encompass those aspects of the compassion and the awareness. And so I think, like, naturally we're going to see a shift in how many more women are working in this space, just because of hopefully the people that are capitalizing on the medicine are also working with the medicine with intention too. So those are my thoughts.
Yes, Janelle. And we know from studies that companies that have women in leadership roles do better. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's good business. So it's exciting. I really look forward to seeing what we all can do in this space.
Thank you. And so kind of shifting over to sort of current times with the pandemic, Janelle, you shared a little bit earlier about where you were sort of at with your planning before the pandemic hit. I loved your approach to that in the video. It was just so authentic and kind of funny. It was great. So, what are some considerations for people job hunting in this industry, really wanting to break through, kind of understanding the current climate? Do you have any thoughts, Janelle, on that side?
Yeah. So I would say that there are many people that want to get in the space right now, because it is booming, and now there's more news coming out, and their lives are changing, and it's great, and the stigma is breaking, and all of it. I get messages all the time on LinkedIn, and I think the best way to go about that is really, like, offering your support and how can and asking questions. So how can I support you on your mission of the work you're doing? Or I'm really interested in learning about X topic. Like, do you know anyone who would be able to chat for 15 minutes, right? Because it's not regular business. It's really like the people with the best intentions are gonna, that's who I want to speak to in business. And I think that's where a lot of opportunity lies. And organizations see that, like, if you are really living and breathing and being in that conscious space and being so active in maybe it's in your community, or it's on your own platform, or just in general, you are just so passionate about this, like, that shines through to organizations in this space. Because some of the organizations just starting up they're not there yet. So they want people to be the leaders and for you to come in so that you can create that company culture, right? And really have that wisdom shine through. So yeah. Did that answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, I think something so interesting about that is, like, the fact that companies appreciate this authentic connection and interest in the industry and kind of how it relates to people personally is not exactly what you're sort of told when you're job hunting, or when you're first learning how to kind of move out of school into a career, or kind of into your next level. So, how refreshing to know that is something of value. Christina, what is microdose experience, throughout this pandemic? I mean, you've had great growth, but during such a turbulent time, and what do you really hope to see from candidates coming through and people interested in working with you?
Well, the pandemic really did present an opportunity for Microdose to get its start by hosting virtual conferences. So many of us were, during lockdown, were joining these online events and wanting to learn, and we had more time on our hands than we usually did, right? So we were actually fortunate to launch, during the pandemic. And then it was also a big challenge as we were coming up to hosting our first in-person event, wondering if we would actually be able to do it, needing to be so cautious and safe about how we were going to do it so we could host an event that everyone left healthy and happy. And so there were different challenges and the opportunities that the pandemic presented. And to your second question, I also am looking to see the passion that people have for why they want to be in this space. And I would really suggest, to go ask for information interviews. That's how I started. When I was looking at psychedelics and wanting to learn, I asked anyone and everyone who would take my call if they would spend some time with me, 15 minutes on the phone. And it was just a time for me to ask them questions about their experience, about, teaching me about the space, teaching me about the psychedelic medicines. And then to be so bold to ask if you have an opportunity. Do you have something that might be a fit for me? Or do you know someone who might be willing to chat with me as well? So that's how I found success getting into the space and really took time to find the right opportunity. I'll say to everyone, you don't need to take the first job that comes your way. You get to choose what's the right fit. So taking these conversations as not only them considering you as a potential candidate, but also you considering them and understanding what the company is like. Who is it? What's the culture like? And does it feel like a right fit?
I love that. It makes me think it's a little bit like dating, right? Like you want to know if they're into you, but like, are you into them? Did you think about that? So I love that perspective. Janelle, you started your own business. You launched this new company during a pandemic in a brand new sort of environment. And so any advice or thoughts that you can share around being an entrepreneur in the space? And, we've got quite a few interested entrepreneurs with us today, so I'm sure they'd appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, so I think it definitely helped that I had already, I launched in a space that I have had a foot in the door for several years now. And so I'm so grateful for all of my partners who supported me in that. Really, when I looked back at the analytics with the Kickstarter, just with the launch, the most powerful tool was my network and LinkedIn, honestly. I was featured in probably like 6 or 7 newsletters, and that didn't make as big of difference as really just people sharing it, because your ecosystem and your web is my LinkedIn is like all psychedelic all psychedelic organizations. And so for me, it's really like, that's what I did. I went out to every single partner and I said, this is what I'm doing. I really think it's such a needed tool in the space. Like, how can I support you? And would you be open to being a supporting partner for this initiative? And I think it comes back to really like sharing the story, and like Holly was saying, the education behind why you're doing what you're doing. So for example, I had somebody reach out to me the other day who saw my Kickstarter and sent me a message. It was actually on a dating app, funny enough. And he goes, I can't tell if there's good intention behind this, or this is just another company trying to capitalize psychedelic or sacred medicine. And instead of being offended, I was curious about that. And I went, hey, well, actually, this is what I'm doing. And I explained, this is a tool that people can use and it's accessible, and maybe they can't afford $500 ketamine treatments. Maybe they can't afford a $5,000 retreat, or maybe they don't have access to a psychedelic therapist, And so for me, this is one tool that can be used with all of those things. But when I explained it like that, he was just like, oh, thank you so much. You did not have to reply to me. Thank you so much. Like, keep doing the work you're doing. So the energy totally shifted. And I think that's the best part to go about like launching a business or starting your own business is really like telling that story of your why and getting people on board with it. And there's so many people in the space like that want to help. Like it was overwhelming, the support that I got. So I'm just extremely grateful for that. And if there are people on this chat that want to collaborate, I am a queen at content and collaborating. So please reach out.
Amazing. And so actually kind of while we're on that note, you mentioned LinkedIn. So are you feeling like LinkedIn is a place that's friendly towards the psychedelics industry? And have you seen a lot of success like trying to network through that platform? I bring up networking specifically because I do feel that the industry is very global at this point, compared to other industries that have become so nuanced by country or state or what have you. The psychedelics industry really feels like a global movement with sort of pinpoints around the world, and everyone's sort of waiting to see what country is going to move things forward a little bit more quickly. And so from that perspective, Janelle, would you recommend LinkedIn to the community in terms of engagement and networking?
100%. Yeah, for sure. I even sharing your content and what you're working on, people see that and it has a longer lifespan than say Facebook or Instagram. So you can see a post for a week or even two usually. So more people see that, and then they can easily reach out to you. Like I posted a blog article on, I think it was like the 7 reasons to use an integration journal. From there, I had Corey Firth, the executive director of CPA, reach out to me, and now he supported my Kickstarter and we're working on something together. So it's just like, wow, just from that one blog article, we are the relationship that we have has just exploded, and we're like, let's do this together. And how can we like really like bring these tools of transformation to more people? So one little action can do so much.
Christina, do you feel the same way?
I absolutely do. I personally use LinkedIn to network and to ask for those informational interviews when I first got in the space. And we at Microdose also see an opportunity to have a job board that is specific to the psychedelics industry. So look for that. We will be launching a job board on microdose.buzz soon with all kinds of career opportunities. So you can browse, specific psychedelic jobs on our website soon. And then I also want to take the opportunity, I teased this a little bit earlier, but I want to share another way that you might choose to get involved in the psychedelic space, whether you're already in the industry and you want to get more involved, or maybe you're outside of the industry and this would be a passion project of yours. So we are launching what is called Microdose X. We're creating a global community of psychedelic free thinkers and thought leaders, and we'll be hosting events around the world. We'll be partnering with the chapter heads in their local communities. So we plan to partner with the chapter heads to have 100 events in 2022. Wow. Yeah, it's a big undertaking. We're really excited. We need to find the right people for this initiative. So we really welcome anyone to apply who is interested in that chapter head in their local community. And what this will look like is almost a mini Wonderland conference of sorts. These are small gatherings. As we grow, they may, grow to become actual large gatherings, but we're going to start small. And we want to involve the right people. We'll help you source speakers and thought leaders, and you'll have the Microdose platform from which to build. So that is Microdose X, and it will be coming soon.
That is so exciting. So if someone's interested in that, Christina, should they just check out the website or send you a note? What do you think?
I would welcome anyone to personally contact me, please. I am so open to that. And then keep an eye on our website where we will have the application process, much more details of what Microdose X is and how you can get involved.
Amazing. I feel like this chat is so motivating. I mean, like the first panel was so excellent and such deep learning. And, you know, you really see how these amazing neurologists and scientists and people with PhDs like have a real carved out opportunity in psychedelics. But like any other industry, it sort of needs everyone, and it needs everyone behind it. And so I love this notion from both of you that like if this is a passion of yours, that piece is going to go a long way in terms of sort of moving those interviews and those conversations forward. And the tip around an information interview is so relevant. It's sometimes you forget that people are open to just really sharing and having a discussion with you about what opportunities kind of look like. So I liked that piece of advice a lot, because you sort of forget that that's sort of an opportunity. We haven't got a ton of questions through. I think both of you have been really excellent at kind of sharing your position. But perhaps we could sort of wrap our conversation. If anyone has a question, please post it. But perhaps both of you could share your top pieces of advice for anyone really looking to enter psychedelics, sort of regardless of where they may be coming from. Christina, let's start with you.
I think first it would be to be courageous. It might be scary to think about getting into an emerging industry, and one in which there has been stigma, and there still is in certain parts of the world and with certain groups of people. And as we come together to work through that, your bravery, it will go a long way. You know, if you're passionate about this, really follow that, and know that if you're coming from this genuine place of why you're getting involved, that success will follow, that you can manifest that. So being courageous, and really logistically speaking, think about the skills that you might bring from other industries. So even though the psychedelic space might be a new one for you and you don't have the prior experience in that kind of business itself, I took time to think about what is my skill set from banking and from cannabis. What are the things that I can really bring to a psychedelics organization that needs these kind of skills as we grow? All psychedelic companies will need those who are at organizing and operations and all parts of the business. And that doesn't necessarily have to be we've had in psychedelics. So you can think about how I, with my existing skill set, can pivot. That's what I did. So that would be some general advice I'd love to share.
Thank you. And Janelle, what's your advice for people looking to enter psychedelics?
Mm-hmm. I wanted to mention too, if you're wanting to get into this space, there are a lot of communities like Psilocybin Alpha and the Conscious Fund, so many places that are listing opportunities. So definitely check those out. The best piece of advice that anyone's given me, and when I first started in this space, was just to be curious about everything. And so right now, the team at Third Wave, we're reading the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Amazing, amazing book. It's my second time reading it. And that speaks to operating above the line and seeing everything as an interaction or an opportunity to learn. And when you're below the line, you're coming at it to like being right or seeing situations happening to you. And so, yeah, I always try to stay curious and open and looking at everything with a sense of wonder. So I think that is a trait that you can really take into a workplace, and leaders see that.
I love that. So courageous and curious is kind of how we're summing that up. We've got a question here from Ginger. Actually a comment. So she says, coming out of the psychedelics closet, it's really not scary once you do it, and there's lots of support within the psych space. plus it's a chance to educate other people. Isn't that funny? I mean, once you're involved in a new industry and you demonstrate that, you are the go-to for so many questions from your friends, from your family, which I've always viewed as the chance to educate myself in order to be sort of passing on that information. Her question here is, can you speak the concern a lot of people have about making money in the space without selling your soul? You know, we touched really lightly on that sort of at the beginning. But Christina, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, I'm happy to. I feel that they did start to touch on this issue and this challenge that I personally have felt as I joined a company that's really focused on the B2B of the industry. And our events are sponsored. So we are working with companies that want to get their story out, and we help support them in marketing efforts. But we have cultivated an audience that is interested in that. They are looking to understand companies' stories, and they are looking for the investment opportunities. So when I join Microdose and when I'm involved in planning our events, I know that I'm coming from that need of investors who are interested in understanding what's happening in the psychedelics industry. And that is the value that I'm bringing to the space as part of the organization. I am partnering with companies that need funding in order to grow. And it is heavily business focused, and yet I'm also able to use the opportunity that I have in the role that I have to share our platform with the other important conversations that need to happen, with the Indigenous reciprocity topics, with diversity. We really need to think about, if we're going to share our platform, we need to do that from a diverse perspective, and not just hosting panels that look like a lot of former old school industries.
Thank you. Janelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree there. I think it's our responsibility to work with instead of against. And so yes, there's a lot of money coming in, but they can learn just as much from us little guys or girls as we can from them, I think, as well. And so yeah, how I always look at it as an opportunity to collaborate and building community that way. How can we partner and educate at the same time?
Mm-hmm. I feel like, a little bit of education helps too, because like research and development is so much more expensive than I think most people sort of understand. And the ability to generate that funding, it's no small feat. And so there's definitely a business element. But I think having people such as yourselves that have both sides of the coin in terms of experience and feelings towards the industry, as well as your ambition and drive, you guys are really excellent faces for what this can really look like, bringing both of those elements together. Because like any business, of course, people are out to make money, but there's lots of different ways to go about it. And I think we have a lot to learn from cannabis in terms of some of the mistakes that we've seen. And I think too, from some of the reputation challenges that we've seen, taking a few steps forward and having to take multiple steps back because of a couple bad apples. And I think the industry has the ability to really hold each other really accountable, for what we're seeing and what we're doing, which I think is so exciting. So any final pieces of advice that you would give our crowd? Janelle, maybe over to you. Any final pieces of advice that you might give to anyone looking to really drive their career forward in this space?
I don't know if it's anything new, but I would say to really understand and get to know the medicines and read the books of where this research started and learn the traditions and the lineages who used the medicines before us. Because if you work with the medicine yourself, that really shines through to any employer if you know the medicine and its and they know that it's not easy work. This is not, it's not all unicorns and rainbow visuals. So I would say, yeah, if you're committed on the journey and like truly walking the block, then that is incredibly powerful, and that really shines and bleeds through into your work and into how organizations perceive you and want to work with you. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. And Christina.
Yes, similarly, some of the lessons that I've learned from psychedelic medicine itself is able to really guide me in my career. Remaining humble, surrendering to the challenges that come up, and knowing that there's something to be learned. Trusting the journey and going with the flow is something that in ceremony comes up time and again. And when I'm able to remember that in my professional life, it really helps. I would also share some advice that I crowdsourced from my team. Some badass women on my team wanted to tell you to know your craft, know your worth, trust your gut, speak up, and get what you're worth. And then there's one final piece that I when I think back on when I heard this, when I was an intern in the banking industry, I was so surprised to hear my boss tell me this advice. And it can be very surprising too, as we're talking about psychedelic medicines, which have the power to heal humanity, such important things. But this boss of mine told me, at the end of the day, work isn't everything that matters. The other parts of life are so important: love and friendship and our family, personal growth. When you're really taking a step back and taking time to focus on all these other parts of life, and knowing that that's really what is so important at the end of the day, that too shows in your career.
I love that. And we know that's true. Like, burnout's a real thing, right? And without the balance, we can get there. And we know burnout for women, especially during the pandemic, has been very hard, and also even more challenging for parents and all that. So that's a great perspective. Thank you. So I'm going to throw to Danielle. She'll be running all the rooms and placing us together. So over to you, Danielle. Thank you so much, Christina and Janelle. That was wonderful.
Thank you. And yes, definitely agreed. This was all great. Thank you so much for joining us today. This wraps up Candor Connect. But stay tuned for more. We're going to be announcing our 2022 lineup soon. And we do have a WWC conference, our bigger Women in Cannabis and Psychedelics experience, and that's coming on June 1st and 2nd. Katie, any final words before we sign off?
No, just thank you to everyone. Thanks, Danielle. You did a great job today. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We'd love your feedback. So if you have any constructive feedback for us, we're really looking to the community to help us kind of craft out these events and make sure they're really important and relevant for you. So we're really open to kind of any of those pieces. So keep us posted.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.